Any public input that isn't on the agenda this evening? Mr. Nine, welcome.
Should I sit here?
Yeah, that's always nice.
So, the reason I'm here is, as a town meeting member, I saw the budget presented last week, and I know that the fiscal dilemma that we're all in, as a town meeting member, as an administrator in another school district, I'm fully aware of it and certainly sympathize with it. The concern that I have, though, is around the fitness center and the fact that it is a true state-of-the-art facility, and that, during the course of the school year, I'm in and out of a lot of districts, and I'm always, attentive to what they have and what we have in Reading. And I have to say that I haven't seen one yet that matches even close to what we have in Reading. And along with that, it's been taken really good care of. I mean, it looks like it was the day it was put in place. So anyways, I'm not going to say let's find money from the current budget, because I don't think that's realistic, but I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of maintaining it particularly, and that would come with staffing too. Currently, the staff that's been there for most of the after-school days is extremely well-trained. They're CPR certified in the most case, DFib. They also know proper usage of the equipment, as well as proper maintenance of the equipment, which is key. Both of those are very key. I know in the past I've seen, when I was there, it was not unusual to instruct someone how to use the machine the right way, or some of the free weights. So that's even from a liability standpoint, that's critical, I think. And then also, it's got an environment in it, I think, that's been established that's very welcoming. I think faculty, students enjoy going in there. It might not get, the type of use that we might like to see it be used by students, but it certainly gets a lot of athletic use as well. So anyways, in terms of supervision, previously I know that we had a weight room, so to speak, in the old building that was, if anything, a pure room that wasn't really welcoming to anybody, but it was supervised. And I think that it was primarily used by athletic teams. Mr. Croft can probably bear that out. I know two of the teams that really utilized it to a great extent are the boys and girls track teams, as well as other teams as well, but they take full advantage of it. My concern is that it has been staffed. That room itself, that old beat-up room with lots of crummy equipment but still usable, had been staffed, I think, in some ways since the mid-'90s. And if we saw it relevant to that point in time to keep track of, keep good care of that equipment, then certainly this equipment really needs to have good attention to it. So anyways, I do think that, there's limited resources, obviously, but because of the fact that I think our students really benefit from a great facility, I know people look at the user fee and say, we're already charging them a lot, but I think in comparison to other communities, I don't think we're that high. And also in the fact that they don't have a facility as nice as we have, that it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask anybody that's going to use it, athletes, students, general population, faculty, $35 fee per year, one-time fee. So you could play 3 sports, but just pay it once. And I'm using numbers that I think I've heard in the past. Approximately 600 students participate in athletics, and I know that there's students that just use it in general. So I think it would be realistic to think that, let's say, if we charged 600 students $35, you can do the math. I think it comes out to about $21,000, which I believe would cover it. So I'm just offering that up as a potential solution. Maybe you've talked about this, but I really think that we have such a beautiful facility that I don't think you can just leave it and say that, the coaches that are going to use it in the afternoon will take care of it, because I think it's unrealistic to think that the track team's going to send one of their coaches up there to supervise it when they've got 90 kids down on the field, and maybe even some of them going up there. It's still unrealistic to think that that's going to happen. Just throwing that out there, and appreciate your consideration of it. And,
I appreciate it.
Anything else I can do, I'd be more than happy to assist with.
I appreciate it. I will say that and typically I don't comment during public input, but I will tell you that we have raised the athletic fee considerably. I myself, like most people in this room, didn't pay an athletic fee when I went to school, but now we're actually asking some of our families to pay, if they've got if they're playing 3 sports, they're pushing almost $1,000 to compete, to play. That's a lot of money. I honestly don't think that we can bear adding another $35 on top of that. However, I share your concern that that amazing fitness center is going to become the football weight room, and I don't want to see that happen. I want to see it remain open for everyone that wants to use it, and I know the committee feels that same way.
What is the current user fee? I was under the impression.
You know what, isn't that embarrassing?
Next year will be
225.
225. We just
My math was way off on
in this year's
1,000, please don't.
budget. Next year's budget, it's raised $40 per student per sport.
There's a cap though, right?
There's a cap with
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 215 next year.
215, and I
215.
apologize, I didn't have that number. That's why I shouldn't comment during public input. And the cap, John or Mary, do you happen to know off the top of your head, Dr. Doherty? It's a cap of
A family cap.
family cap. So,
A family cap.
I just think that, $35 fee to participate and use a facility such as that's not unrealistic. And I know, my own kids, we paid user fees as well when they went to the Reading Public Schools. But I think parents, it's easy for me to say because I don't have kids in that situation anymore, but I do know that it's not unusual to pay a fee for your child to play a sport, and then there's add-ons to that. You got to buy pitchers, you got to buy candy. Go to a dance for the program. I think it's not unrealistic, but I'll leave that for your discretion, obviously. But I am concerned about it. I don't really know if there's another solution, but I certainly don't see it being taken out of the budget. $21,000 or $20,000 is potentially half a teacher position. So, anyways, I just wanted to offer that up.
Mr. Knight, I appreciate it. Thank you very
All
much.
right.
Thank you. Further public input, not on the agenda? Okay, we'll do reports. Are there any reports this evening from committee members?
Sure.
You can go, Ms. Janowski.
It's not necessarily a report. I just wanted, and I don't know if you would be mentioning this, Dr. Doherty, but the Understanding Disabilities Program next Tuesday evening, May 17th.
17th, yep.
The invited guest is Shonda Schilling, and she will be speaking about her book, The Best Kind of Different. And I've heard her speak. She's excellent. It's really an engaging discussion. It will be held at Parker at 7 o'clock. All are invited. The entire community is invited to attend, and it is a free event. And I did want to highlight that particular opportunity for us.
Thank you. Further reports from committee members? I only quickly wanted to mention that Ms. Janowski and I had office hours this evening from 6:30 to 7:15, and we had visitors, and it was fantastic. So thank you, Dr. Doherty, for getting the word out. Thank you, Matt, and the other town newspapers for getting the word out on office hours tonight. It was nice not to sit alone for 45 minutes. I guess. Dr. Doherty, do you have a report this evening?
I do have a couple of things. I want to start off by highlighting that last Thursday we had 39 students participate in the annual Special Olympics event, which was held at McDonald Stadium in Malden. 39 excited students. I actually wrote about it on my blog this week, showed some pictures as well, and it was a great event. We had several staff members there cheering the kids on, and I want to recognize those students, but I also want to thank Tara Herlihy, who organized the whole event. I believe this is the 7th year in a row that Reading has participated in the event. Also wanted to say our middle school jazz band participated last week in the Massachusetts Association of Jazz Educators Junior Festival and received a gold medal. The festival was held here at Reading Memorial High School. So kudos to that group and to Joe Mulligan, who oversees that group. And just wanted to also give you an update that if you recall in November, Mark Dwyer came in as part of the naming process, wanted to look at putting a memorial on the high school grounds in memory of those that lost their life in 9/11, but also for Kevin McCarthy, who is the Reading Memorial High School grad who, of 1978, I believe, who also lost his life. And Mr. Dwyer has been working diligently behind the scenes to design it, gather some sponsors, raise some money for this, and he's going to be reporting to the committee on the 23rd, the progress. I was able to see the drawings the other day, go out to the site where we're proposing to put this. I know also that he's going to be doing a short presentation for the selectmen and talking about it tomorrow night. So on the 23rd, he'll be coming in to do a presentation for the school committee as well.
Why does the selectmen get to see it first?
Good question.
Really?
Mr. Marzoli, I don't get it, but okay, that's wonderful.
I think because it's tied into the 9/11. We're trying to tie it into the 9/11 10th anniversary ceremony. It's going to be held in conjunction with the town.
I think it's wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. Continue.
But Mr. Dwyer's been doing a great job behind the scenes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, David, sure.
Dr. Doherty, I wondered, could you share with us who has been on the review committee? Is there a design review committee or?
I think he's working with the person that designed the little quiet area that's out here as well. It's the same person. I'm not sure the name right now. It doesn't come to my attention. But he's been working with the town. He's been working with some other individuals that would design the monument that has done it in the past.
I see.
It will not be small.
It will not be small. But just remember,
It's very nice.
Yeah, it's very well done.
school committee. It started. Anything else, Dr. Doherty?
No, that's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Delay, do you have a report this evening? Misty Garavella? See how I'm kind of stalling just a little bit for my friend?
Can
Oh, yes, Mrs. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Doherty, for mentioning the Special Olympics, the games last Thursday. I was present at the games for the first year, and it was very exciting to see how many students Reading Public Schools had. 39 certainly was, other than Malden, the host city, we had, I think, the most students there. And it was really great to see the staff and students excited together about this really great event. These kids were with their true peers and were just really having a great time competing, and I really liked the whole community feel of it. And it was, they held the banner that said Reading Public Schools. They had great school and town pride representing Reading that day. So it was really, really nice.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on, Ms. Delay will have a FY12 budget update.
At our last meeting, when we were awarding the bus contract with, to North Suburban Bus Company, we did discuss the issue or the challenge with respect to the Wood End bus. And I did meet with and have had conversation with the owner of North Suburban Transportation, and he has assured me that he is going to look into how we might be able to address that challenge without having to incur the additional $31,000 that I had mentioned last school committee meeting that would bring with it. I don't have a proposed solution at this point. He hasn't gotten back to me. We just had that meeting on Thursday. Our goal would be to try and see what we could do within those parameters. But one of the concerns that we have and we need to think about is that, as you mentioned, there are no mandatory riders in the Wood End district. Everybody is within the 2-mile radius. We do not offer transportation to any of the other elementary schools that have no mandatory riders. That would include Barrows, Joshua Eaton, and Birch Meadow. Killam is actually the only district that has kids outside that. And then, of course, the law extends to 6th graders, so there are several kids at Coolidge and I think one or two students at Parker as well. So we would continue to do that. So we need to be sensitive to that. So I think we'll see what options are available, but I think, internally we are trying to figure out how to address that challenge. As I mentioned, it would be a $31,000 savings if we were able to use the current buses, just the 2 buses, and not have to have a third bus to do just an elementary run in the morning and the afternoon. We would lose the revenue from the Wood End students, that's about $12,000, but in the net, we would save about $19,000 in the current year's budget. So there is no action at this point. If the owner comes back with something that would incur a cost, and we feel that the fee for that, if we wanted to proceed with that, and there was a fee that was different than what you have approved for the bus right now, which is $365, then we would come back and ask for that vote.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Ms. Janowski?
One of our guests this evening did come specifically about that particular issue, and I think one of the things that he was concerned about was they were not aware of the possibility of losing the bus, or even they had some misconceptions about the bus until they read it online. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we do have, that it's as transparent as possible, and that maybe the Wood End community is more aware of what is happening.
Thank you. Further questions? Mr. Croft?
Concerning the busing situation, we often are left sitting in parking lots, and that happens altogether too frequently. What they do is double dip and double assign, and often a bus will come from Peabody to pick us up, and it doesn't get here till, much too late, a half hour, sometimes 3/4 of an hour late, for a track meet that has to start at 3:30. And I would like to have us require of the bus of North Suburban to condense, their circuits a little better, to be a little more attentive to our kids, and so that we don't end up sitting in parking lots. And that has happened a couple of times this year already, actually 3 times. But, I think we've spoken of it before, and perhaps we'll respond probably.
Mr. Lai?
Yes. A couple things. We do have provisions in the contract that if the bus is late, whether it be for a school run or a field trip or athletic event, whatever event is, there are provisions in the contract for us to back charge the company.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of times these things happen and I don't know about it, and so I have had a conversation with Mr. Vaccaro to try and get that feedback from coaches so that we can impose those penalties where we have the right to be able to do so. And I did talk to Mr. Vaccaro. He stated that his feeling on that in terms of pursuing it was that there are often times where we ask the bus to come at a certain time and there are changes made, and then the bus company might show up at 10 o'clock and the team doesn't show up till noon. So he felt that there were an equal amount of times where we sort of didn't hold up our end of the bargain, and as a result, he didn't want to impose a penalty when they might be a little bit late, because he felt that they would probably have some recourse if we didn't show up when we said that we were going to show up as well. So I got the sense that it does happen, but that it all kind of works out in the wash. But I did encourage him to let me know when that happened, because we certainly want to preserve our contractual rights wherever
Yeah,
possible.
it happens more often in the spring. I think it's the end of the season, and for some reason or another, they have trouble covering routes.
Further questions? Thank you, Mr. Lai. Did you want to continue on substitute teachers?
Sure. I probably don't have to restate the fact that there were, but I will. There were certainly a lot of discussions. We talked at length about substitute teachers when we talked about the cost, when we presented that information during the budget process. And we talked about the fact that we pay a certain administrative charge to Kelly Services, who currently we outsource all of our teacher substitutes, teacher placement of substitutes through Kelly Services. And we had about $78,000 in the budget for that administrative fee. And certainly we took that feedback in, and we have been doing a lot of research since that time and trying to figure out other ways that we could provide high-quality subs to teachers and do it in a very, cost-effective manner. We've spoken to other districts, looked at what other districts do, and actually there aren't as many districts as I would have anticipated that actually do outsource their substitute teachers, a whole bunch of different models. But one of the more popular models that's coming out right now is the use of a web-based tool, web-based platform to do absence management and substitute placement services. And actually, Kelly Services utilizes a web-based platform to do that, and it works really well. We've gotten very positive feedback from teachers and administrators and substitutes about the ability to go online and record their, when they expect to be out, and then have substitutes be able to log on and take those absences well in advance in many cases. So we spoke to a number of districts. We actually got a demonstration from one of the leading providers in the area. Actually, they're a national provider called ASOP. It's an acronym for automated attendance or something, but ASOP. And we were very impressed with their product. It happens to be the same platform that Kelly uses as well. We only have access to certain features of it through Kelly, but the full platform offers us a whole lot of different tools to be able to track absences and be able to ensure that we have substitutes in the classroom when we need them. In doing our research, we also learned that Wakefield Public Schools was also looking into this automated placement system. They actually do not outsource. They have their own substitutes in-house, and they have a substitute coordinator who does their substitute assignment. But this was actually going to generate a cost savings for them as well. So we met together with the vendor, and that particular vendor was willing to allow us to collaborate and give us a break on the training fees, the implementation fees, and also to base the per sub cost on the total pool of staff for both Reading and Wakefield, which was a savings of about 25 cents per employee. But across many employees, it was almost a $5,000 savings from collaborating together. The other thing we talked about with Wakefield was sharing our substitute pool, so that if Wakefield Public Schools has, say, 100 temporary employees providing sub coverage, and we have 100, that now our pool will be 200, and obviously the deeper the pool is, the better chance that your absences are always filled. So we did a cost analysis, and it seemed like a viable option. To make sure that we were in compliance with procurement law, we did a request for quotations. ASOP was actually the only person that responded, the only company that responded, but there are not a lot of vendors out there that have these comprehensive web-based solutions. So you can see in the memo and the attachment to the memo an analysis of what the costs would be, the cost of the current model that we use, which is to use Kelly Services for our teachers, and we also have a coordinator that does the substitutes for paraeducators and for nurses, and then a minor cost related to the phone line that we use that we pay for that sub-coordinator, and that totals a little over $84,000 in expenses. The licensing fee for ASOP, which again is based on a per employee basis, would be about $11,600. That would be an annual licensing fee that we would pay. The system, all the data would be housed on their servers. The access would be through our website for both substitutes and employees, but it would actually be their system operating in the background. I know that when we had discussions about moving to an in-sourced or an in-house substitute model, we talked about the fact that there would be additional costs because there would be additional resources that would be required within the district. And so you can see here there's an additional $21,000. Part of that would go to add 10 hours per week to the current schedule, the hours for 2 support staff that we have here in the office. They would support HR and they would support payroll. Obviously, when you're adding 90 to 100 employees, that's 90 to 100 more employees that you have to set up and orient. And as far as payroll goes, it's not, it's not an insignificant task to track the hours and put that into the payroll system on a week-to-week basis. So that would require additional time in our office to make sure that was done and done properly. And then there's also proposed additional compensation for our human resources administrator, who, if you think about it, if we added 100 employees, even though they're temporary employees, that would actually increase the number of employees in the district by 20%. She would be the person who would be responsible for recruiting, for hiring, for orienting them, to ensure that they be trained, to make sure all the personnel records are properly managed. She would also be responsible for the system administration. She would be the administrator of ASOP, and she would be responsible for keeping people trained and administrators trained, making sure that teachers are trained. I would be facilitating the payroll administration, but she would also be helping, she would be the person who was in charge of any disciplinary matters, because they wouldn't be building-based staff, they'd be district staff, so any disciplinary issues would be handled by her. So that's the bulk of the additional cost, and there would also be a one-time cost to develop a training program for substitutes. Kelly currently does provide training to their substitutes. What we would do is, under Patty's supervision, Wakefield and Reading would work together, put together a team of teachers and maybe a couple of administrators, and they would come up with a training program that would be specific to our substitutes. Once that curriculum and that training program is in place, then we would then designate staff that would provide training on a regular basis, because these substitutes there would be a good amount of them that would be hired at the beginning of the year, but there's a lot of turnover, so they would come in on a regular basis, and we'd have to make sure they were trained on not just instructional practices, but district policies and procedures, EpiPen administration, food allergies, all the things that teachers, substitutes would have to deal with. So there's some recurring expenses. And the other piece that's sort of an unknown is, if we were not able to fill the sub positions, where would we turn to? Internally, what would we turn to? And Kelly does offer a sort of a backup service, so that we would pay them on an as-needed basis. We could tap into their sub pool to provide substitute coverage if we did not have the subs to do that. And we don't know how successful we'll be. I'm assuming that we'll have an 80% fill rate, which is sort of low. Kelly's always been in the 95 to 96% rate, but until we sort of get up and running and have a well-established pool of subs, I think it behooves us to be a little conservative. So with that in mind, the potential savings to the district is still over $25,000. I think certainly financially this makes sense, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But I think it also will provide a higher quality sub pool. Not that Kelly doesn't have good subs, but I think to be able to acculturate people to Reading and be able to come up with our own training program and have people be a Reading employee will certainly make them feel much more attached to and part of the Reading school community. So I think it's advantageous from that perspective as well. The only action that we would need for you to take would be to approve authorizing John to enter into a intermunicipal agreement with Wakefield to be able to do this collaboratively. The Board of Selectmen would have to take a similar action, and that's under Massachusetts law in terms of doing any type of intermunicipal services. And the Board of Selectmen would need to do the same. And we would look for them. I think that's on their meeting agenda for the 24th, I think, of May.
Do I have a motion?
Move to authorize the superintendent to execute the intermunicipal agreement with the Wakefield Public Schools for purposes of collaborating on certain aspects of absence management and substitute placement systems and services for the period of July 1st, 2011 through June 30th, 2012, as outlined in the Director of Finance and Operations Memorandum dated May 5th, 2011, contingent upon similar approval and authorization by the Reading Board of Selectmen.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Janowski. Can I go first?
You're the chair?
How will it work between Wakefield and Reading? Will they be Reading employees? Will they also be Wakefield employees? Or in the web application, are they all the same pool?
Yeah, in the web application, the only thing that will be joint will be that the business manager in Wakefield and there's his support staff and myself and Elizabeth Conway will all be doing the implementation together. And so the person will only need to come out and do the implementation once, so we're sharing that cost. The training, they will do Wakefield Public Schools in the morning and Reading Public Schools in the afternoon, so we share that cost. The systems themselves will be two separate systems. Wakefield will have their system and Reading will have ours. The employees will be anyone who is currently working, wants to be a sub for Reading will be a Reading employee. There may be Wakefield subs who become both temporary employees of both Wakefield Public Schools and Reading Public Schools, but they're not joint employees, they're separate employees.
In the world of substitute teaching, is that common, that you're actually an employee of multiple districts?
To the extent that, yes, that they have their own in-house temporary employees. In the case of Kelly, they would be dispatched, could be dispatched
Sure.
potentially to any of the districts that Kelly covered, although not many of them were contiguous. This is advantageous because we're so close to each other.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mrs. Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say, as a substitute teacher, that this is, and I'm in a different district, I really appreciate the creative plan that you came up with, understanding that we wanted to do something different this year, and I know that you did too. I think it's really important that we highlight how great it is that we're going to be creating the orientation and hiring the people to be Reading employees, to have the kind of skills that we require as opposed to outsourcing it to someone else. I think that, like you say, I think the loyalty that we can breed here, as well as cultivating teachers who want to work in our district, I think it's a win-win all around, and I really do appreciate the fact that it also has a significant cost savings to the district. So thank you very much for doing that.
Mr. Misha?
Thank you. I'm wondering, there's the potential for substitutes to prefer one district over the other, and that within that pool, there might be a sense of, who wants to go where. Are the pay scales going to be the same if we enter into an agreement like this? Of course, all the teachers are going to want to come work in Reading, but I'm wondering, is there anything in the agreement, and I apologize, I didn't read through it as thoroughly as I probably should have. Is there anything in here that talks about what we pay a substitute per day versus what Wakefield would, and how might we seek to find equity there to make sure that we're attracting those within the pool that we're most interested in?
Yep, no, that's an excellent question. We did look into that, and actually, as it stands right now, I guess we're on the better side of that equation. So we actually have two pay scales, $65 per day if you're not licensed with the DESE, and $75 if you are. And Wakefield is currently paying $60 regardless of your status. So I believe Wakefield will probably, over the next year or two, look to come up to our rates. But I do know also that there are other districts, for example, Woburn, and, not that that's comparable with this, Woburn is a district that actually pays its subs $100 per day. A lot of the subs in Reading could go there. They don't necessarily. So I do think that the Reading subs will prefer the Reading positions, and if there is nothing available, at least they have the opportunity to then jump on to the Wakefield site and see if there's something in Wakefield, and vice versa with the folks from Wakefield as well. I think people do tend to prefer their community-based schools. But at least for now, we're close. We're not that much out of line, but we have a little bit of an advantage there.
Thank you.
Ms. Janowski?
Thank you. I don't have a question, just a comment again to echo what Lisa said. We, as a school committee, were surprised at the administrative costs with the Kelly services. I know we had some discussion about that when it was going to be about $78,000, and now it's actually $84,000. So I thank you that part of your due diligence did come up with a really creative, innovative approach that does allow us to collaborate with another community. And I hope that we continue to see this type of outside-the-box thinking as we continue to meet some of these financial challenges in these difficult times. So I just thank you and appreciate the work that you did with this presentation. And as always, it's excellent to save $25,000.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I just had a comment too, the same as Lisa and Karen. I know that this got a lot of discussion in the budget process, and I really appreciate you coming back so quickly with such a thorough, and again, it's great to save $25,000 and raise the bar at the same time.
Further comment? Seeing none, we're ready for a vote. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Should we, we'll go back. We're gonna talk about the naming of facilities. I have a quick statement I'd like to read, if that's okay. Thank you. In the spring of 2010, the school committee created a building and facilities naming policy. This policy outlines the process and timeline the committee follows for considering nominations for naming. The fall of 2010 was the first time this policy was implemented, and we learned a lot. We received feedback from the naming subcommittee, as well as residents and non-residents, on improvements to the process that we will incorporate back into the policy. One comment that was heard multiple times was that many people were not aware that the process had started. In the fall, we'll do a much better job of getting the word out that nominations are being accepted. And I haven't officially thanked the subcommittee, a member of which is present tonight. Thank you, and I'll make sure I do a better job of thanking the subcommittee. At the school committee's February meeting, the committee voted to refrain from naming the football field at that time. The members who voted for or against the motion each had their own valid reasons for their vote. It must be stated that no one on this committee stated that Mr. John Hollingsworth is not worthy of being honored for his contributions during his tenure at RMHS. After the committee received numerous communications from residents and non-residents regarding the vote, the decision was made to discuss the issue again after town meeting had concluded. Tonight, the committee will first have a discussion on whether or not to override our policy, which states that we will evaluate naming nominations in the fall. If the committee decides to override this policy, then I will accept a motion to name the football field the John Hollingsworth Football Field. We will not discuss alternate names for the field, or naming the stadium as a whole, the practice fields, or any other buildings or landmarks. That will be done in the fall, as our policy states. Furthermore, we have already had the opportunity to hear from many passionate advocates for naming the field. While the committee will certainly answer any questions posed by audience members, I would not expect the need for further statements in support of naming the field. Thank you for letting me read that. With that said, I'll open the floor to the committee members for discussion on bringing the vote back to the table. Mrs. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try and be brief, but I feel like I have to lay the groundwork for my thought process and the way my culminating feeling this evening. When I've had conversations with Mr. Bonazzoli and also with Mr. Graham, who was the chair of the naming subcommittee, as well as Mr. Douglas. I know there were other members of that committee, but I did speak with them, and subsequent to the fall meeting that we had where the nominations were brought forward and Mr. Graham represented the naming subcommittee of the school committee, there was something that just did not sit right with me. And all these many months later, I've had time to reflect and think about it. Mr. Graham made some valid suggestions and points that perhaps should be discussed and reflected in our policy after discussion. I think my hesitation with regarding naming this, as well as my hesitation in somewhat of the other things that we did decide to name. I think it's because I feel that the policy is not completely fleshed out, given the recommendations of the people on the subcommittee that we asked them to do the good work to bring to us. So I feel that before we move forward with any nomination or any vote about naming anything, I think we need to have the discussion as a committee to see if the ideas brought forward to us by the people on the subcommittee need to be incorporated in our policy. So it would be my suggestion that we adhere to the timetable that is set in our policy to discuss nominating anything again, and prior to the next process that starts in the fall, that the committee have a full discussion with regard to what the subcommittee brought forward to us, as well as any other ideas that we have about new things to incorporate into our policy. I'm of the school of thought where when you know better, you do better. And it was the first time around, and I feel that that's the way I'm going to feel comfortable about moving forward with this. And that's...
Ms. Janowski?
As part of the discussion, I would like to move that we override the school policy on naming of facilities to reconsider the vote on the naming of the football field.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Michaud. Did you have a comment as well, or?
I do. I have several comments. I see that we will have a discussion tonight. I was one of the members of the naming subcommittee, and I at the February meeting.
Point of order. Could I just ask that you clarify, you were a member of the committee that developed the policy, but not the
both.
sub? Oh, were you? I'm sorry. Okay.
She's done double duty.
Okay. Well, then I stand clarified. Thank you.
I was both. And thank you for clarifying that. It was a difficult decision in February, and I voted at that time knowing that we would be able to reconsider the vote at another time. But since that time, we've certainly, and I did also state at that school committee meeting that we heard compelling evidence at that Saturday morning session from people in the community who had been impacted by Mr. Hollingsworth. And since then, we have received a wealth of additional materials. And again, I continue to be impressed with who Mr. Hollingsworth was and as an educator. I've been moved to tears by some of the emails and some of the commentary that's been written on the Facebook page. And I said at the February meeting that I did believe that he represented everything that we want to see embodied in a quality educator. And he clearly is a man of integrity. And I do believe that our naming policy does allow us to reconsider our vote at this time. Again, we did make some mistakes with that first, it was the initial vote. But I do believe it does allow us to reconsider our policy because it's not around school student issues, it's not around safety issues. I do believe something like this policy does allow us to be flexible, and I would like to see us move the discussion forward and allow us to vote tonight on naming the field. I do not see any reason to delay until the fall, and I've been very impacted by those who knew Mr. Hollingsworth. I haven't heard anything that would convince me that there's a reason not to move this discussion forward, and I may add additional thoughts after hearing what my fellow members have to say.
Mr. Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to underscore what Mrs. Janowski just said about the evidence and support that was presented to us not only prior to our first vote, but since that time. And I'm still in support of naming the football field the John Hollingsworth Field. I'd also like to comment about the policy and how the policy may or may not have impacted other committee members' votes that first time we voted. My recollection of our discussion that evening was that our conversation strayed considerably from the issue of whether or not to accept the naming subcommittee's recommendation to name the football field the John Hollingsworth Field. We talked about other possible names. We talked about the permanence versus, what we were comfortable doing. We talked about things that were not part of the discussion that should have been taking place at the time, and I think it confused the matter. For that single reason, I think that we should vote again in a very focused and determined way. And in regards to whether or not the policy can be improved, sure, any policy can be improved, but I would put to the rest of you that if it was good enough for the names that we did approve that evening, it should be good enough for all of them, or that we should take all those names away. And I'm not prepared to make that suggestion, but it's either all or nothing. We can't say that our policy is good enough for the media center and the wrestling room, but not good enough for the football field. And so I think absolutely we should vote again this
Thank you.
evening and not wait.
Thank you. Further comments? Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I just asked Mrs. Gibbs, I did not speak to all of the subcommittee members. I just listened to the report that we got, but I'm curious as to what flaws or improvements that they suggested should be made to the policy that would be a reason to hold off until the fall.
Well, one thing
Not
that.
mean to put you
No,
on.
no, I appreciate that. One thing that did come up was that certainly someone should not, their idea was that someone should not be a public official or an employee of the school department, or public official in Reading. The idea was brought up that the person who was nominated perhaps should be deceased. I think these are all, I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. And like I said, when you know better, you do better. And I don't feel one way or the other about either of those two issues, but I just think the discussion needs to happen. And, you know, I agree with what everyone has said about Mr. Hollingsworth, not having met him. He is indeed a man who affected a great many number of people, faculty, students alike, and this is nothing to do with that. This is separate. I feel like we're, I don't want to say the word rushing, because certainly 4 years later, we're not rushing to do anything, but I feel that the discussion needs to happen. I'm not comfortable voting on that until we feel good about our policy and what is in it. And I just don't feel that way yet.
Did you want to follow up?
I won't.
Mr. Misha?
I just want to remind the committee members that the issue of whether or not a nominee was alive or dead was a significant part of the discussion that the original subcommittee that came up with that policy, we talked about that a lot, and we brought that issue forward in our discussion when we presented the draft policy to the rest of the board. And, sure, it's something that there are things to talk about, but we've talked about it. And, I just don't feel like we should talk in circles. We made a decision. I think we should stick with it.
Mrs. Gibbs, would you like to?
Thank you.
Sure.
Then if we made a decision and we should stick with it, given all of the feedback that we got from everybody about how we didn't know, people didn't know that the naming was going to happen, then we should stick with our policy and wait until the fall. I just feel that if we're gonna stick with it, then we should stick with it.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah. I too have been moved by all the letters and emails and respectful comments and everybody that's here tonight. Having said that, we did have a vote in February, and I'm about policy, and we made a policy that said that we can vote again in September, and that doesn't mean, I didn't vote for Mr. Hollingsworth in February. That doesn't mean I won't vote for him in September, but I would prefer to stay with our policy that says that we can bring this up again at the appropriate time, which is in the fall.
Further comments? Mrs. Janowski?
I think the policy actually says that we will discuss it usually once a year, usually in the fall. It doesn't say specifically when or what month, so I think it does allow us some flexibility. I really don't see any advantage to holding off about this particular nomination for a few more months. I think that we've received compelling evidence to address it now, and to I I can see being inflexible about following policy when it has to do with student safety, when it has to do with learning. But when it is about a decision that doesn't impact student safety or learning and instruction, I think we have more flexibility in this. And I think that this is a policy that, does allow us to look at it a little bit differently. And again, this was the very first time that we were dealing with the naming issue. And I think because of all that we have heard from the community, there's been a great deal of support. And it really does seem important for us to recognize the qualities of this particular man who I have not met. I look forward to meeting him, but I have to believe what the community and those outside of the community have said about him. And he does seem to embody everything that we want to hold dear to and respect and honor. And I just think there's no advantage to delaying it for a few more months.
Thank you. Mr. Misha?
Thank you. I hope that we are seen as a board that hears those who elect us and those who are dear to the community that elects us. What I'm hearing is exactly what Mrs. Janowski just stated, that there's no reason to wait. The only feedback I've heard since our vote earlier, and there's been a significant amount of it, it's not like a quiet whisper, is that we as a board made a mistake. I have not heard a single comment about that there's somebody else who's more deserving, or even that should be considered. And so I think that just underscores what would we be waiting for? I mean, are we waiting for somebody else to come out of the woodwork that we would feel better about naming the field after? I have not heard that, and I see absolutely no value in waiting. I'm sure that everybody who's here this evening probably feels the same way. I just don't see the value in putting it off. I think we should make a vote and put it behind us, and depending on how it goes, if it wants to be brought up again in the fall, that's fine, but I think we owe it to the community to vote on this evening.
Further discussion? Mr. Croft?
I want to,
No,
he's a selectman, I have,
committee first. Thank you, Mr. Croft.
don't I have to accede to him?
After you, sir, after you.
Well, first of all, I known John, since Moses wrote on rocks. So this is really, well, dear to my heart in some ways, and it's on a couple of occasions become rather nasty, and I was hoping to avoid that. On that field, you have soccer, boys and girls, you have cross-country. We have lacrosse, track boys and girls. We have MIAA tournaments. It is kind of a local mecca of athletics. I don't think it hurts us to wait another 3 months to vote on this issue, having heard what I've heard from a good number of those folks in the meantime. Since February. We're rookies at this. We have a lot of thinking to do about it. I agree with Chuck. I will have no problem perhaps voting for John's nomination in the fall once we've finished this process, once we've had to listen and more or less consider what is going on with that major facility. Football has a role in our society now, and I think everybody in this room knows that. And it has a prevailing perspective and image in the general public's point of view. This is a timeless nomination. This will go on forever, and I think we'd better do it right this time. And I think that John warrants it. But we have a process here in place. We voted on it once, and I suspect that time's on our side, and perhaps we'll get what we need, if you get my drift.
Further comments from the committee? Ms. Janowski?
I do have a question. For people who are thinking about delaying the vote a few more months, what do you expect to hear differently? Lisa? Yeah.
Mrs. Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't expect to hear anything differently. Like I said, my issue is completely separate from the nomination. My issue is, while Mr. Michaud said we discussed those things that I brought up earlier, I don't think they were ever resolved. At least for me, they weren't ever resolved. I'd like to have a policy in place that I feel very good about. And I feel that we didn't take into consideration all of the input from the subcommittee, and perhaps, you know, we could ask the chair to put it on an agenda for a meeting at a time certain, have the discussion, have the subcommittee come and meet with us about facets of the policy that need to be reworked, things that came up, and then we move forward with our process in the fall.
I can't believe that, really? Mr. Michaud, I'm surprised.
I don't believe that we asked the subcommittee to evaluate our policy.
No,
I
we
believe-
didn't, but
I
they had
believe-
recommendations.
Excuse me, I believe we asked the subcommittee to confirm whether or not the nominations were valid, period. And with all due respect to the naming subcommittee that did their work and offered their opinions, I don't think that we necessarily need to dig things up again just because a subcommittee has some opinions about our policy. It's our policy, it's not the subcommittee's policy.
Mrs. Gibbs?
But if we want to be perceived as someone who hears the people in our town, then I think that a subcommittee we ask to do work for us on our behalf, we need to hear them as well. And I would just like to flesh out that conversation and resolve those issues.
Mrs. Janowski?
I think you're talking, Lisa, more about the policy itself, which I think
Yes.
is a separate issue.
Absolutely, and I've said that a couple of
Right,
times.
And I think what we want to discuss tonight is moving this particular, reconsidering tonight to vote.
Right.
And I think that that's a separate issue. I was on the naming subcommittee that did meet, and it was a unanimous decision. And I think when Mr. Graham did present to us, he did talk about some of the issues at that time. So I don't really believe that there's anything more that we can say. We agreed to this policy. It was a brand-new policy that we approved last year, and this was our first time to be able to implement the policy in place. So I think that that's a separate discussion, and I really want to stick to what we're talking about tonight. You know, if we want to reevaluate the policy at another time, let's do that at another time.
Can I go first, James? Thank you. All of your points are excellent, and thank you for the discussion. I appreciate it. I certainly can sense the passion in people's voices. I would vote in favor of this motion this evening, not because of Facebook and not because of this crowd. I'm sorry, I haven't met the overwhelming majority of you. I'm sure you're wonderful, but I don't know you. And I think that was my problem back in February, is that I didn't know Mr. Hollingsworth, and I didn't ask enough of the sort of Reading founding fathers to get a sense of the man. And since then, I have heard from, forgive me, not you folks, but people that I know in town and people that I greatly respect. And they said, Chris, you got it wrong. And I respect that. And that's why I would vote in favor of reconsidering the vote this evening. I would vote in favor of naming the football field the John Hollingsworth Field. And I wouldn't change my opinion. I would be voting for it again if the committee decides to vote in the fall. I think that each member on this committee has made extremely valuable points. I'm not ready to name the stadium the Hollingsworth Stadium. I really do like the idea of Veterans Stadium or Rocket Stadium, or you can call it something general if you like, but I like that idea. My concern has always been, I wish that we could be naming the entire facilities at once, but we happen to have one of the country's greatest coaches sitting on this board, and we also have one of the best teachers that I knew at my time at Reading High sitting on this board, and it doesn't feel appropriate to be naming, in my opinion, it doesn't feel appropriate to be naming things after that person yet. I wish we were doing it all at once. So if he wants to retire, we'll have a great party for him and we'll move this thing on. But I don't want to hold up honoring Mr. Hollingsworth at this point. I would rather us take care of this issue tonight and not belabor it and wait until the fall. That is my opinion. Mr. Bonazzola, did you have a comment you wanted to make earlier? Because your hand did shoot right up there. Would you like to come up just so the camera gets you? The microphone gets you?
Because you know I hate, it's the first time, James Bonazzola, Board of Selectmen, but also a Reading resident, subcommittee member for the board for this naming rights. And I want to thank and commend the school committee for outlining this policy that you're now debating. We actually thought it was a very good policy because it's now also the basis in which the town is going to be looking at for our facilities throughout the town. So you wrote a very good policy, and I want to thank you for that. We had some minor recommendations, such as historically, naming rights have always been attributed to those who have passed away. We had the awful term of 6 and 6. They had to either be 6 feet under or out for 6 years. Okay? And we had that discussion as subcommittee members of, well, maybe all the naming of facilities or any building should be left to those who have deceased. And what I was impressed about in that discussion, and which convinced me, because I also felt that people should be deceased, was that in order to really honor and make it memorable, why not have the person still living so they can enjoy and realize what they've accomplished in their life? So I agree with you. I wouldn't change that for one bit. I moved to Reading in '97, so I did not grow up in Reading. I did not know Mr. Hollingsworth. But from what I read, what I'd seen only in the packets, I was not on Facebook at that point in time. I was not contacted from anybody because they did not know I was on the subcommittee. But everything I read in the packet that was provided to us was the epitome of your mission statement. And that's what you really want to look at. You want to look at, in 20 years, 50 years, when people look at that field and say, why is it named this? With clearly, without question, people will understand, if you make that decision, why it is the Hollingsworth Field. There's no question. I know that's not your debate, and I know that's some of you looking at the policy. I think the policy is fine. You can move forward with confidence and without any question that you're making the right decisions. You wrote the right policy. It could use some tweaking, but that's not for anybody else to say except yourself. And it's a solid policy that I think you can live with, and you can move forward with. And I truly believe you can move forward with naming it Hollingsworth Field. And it gives you the ability to, I agree with you, Mr. Crusoe, that we can name track and field of Hal Croft. That's one area that we did disagree, that it should not be a voting member on a board, whether it should be named or not. But I do hope that, we don't have to wait for somebody to pass away for them to recognize that realize we recognize their accomplishments. Those accomplishments should be recognized and realized today, just as it was for the wrestling room and any other facility that you look at. So from a naming subcommittee perspective, I want to share that with you. You guys did an excellent job. You should have no worries of what you've done and what you've accomplished, and that you can move forward with great confidence that your mission statement is being achieved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boswell. Hi, Karen.
One final one. Thank you, Mr. Bonazola, for pointing out our mission statement, because I agree with you. I do believe that Mr. Hollingsworth does embody the best of what our mission statement is. And we talk about the influence that educators have on the lives of their students, and this particular educator clearly impacted greatly, well beyond the 4 years that students attended Reading Memorial High School. We are hearing really long-term, compelling, profound stories that show how he profoundly impacted the lives, not of just 5 or 10, but of hundreds of students. And that is the type of educator that I really believe we need to honor. He was a man of integrity, and we don't have, those kinds of educators, we have to be honest, they are not as common as we would like them to be. And I thank you for pointing out how he does, again, embody what our mission statement says. My final thoughts.
Thank you. Further discussion. Mr. Croft.
Well, first of all, there were multiple mistakes on that mission statement. Grammatical mistakes and semantic mistakes, but John did embody that. And I suppose it is not providing the people in the room tonight with immediate gratification if we voted to name the football field after John tonight. I think all of us can live with that. I think that John's name should be timeless in town. The central friction in my mind on this thing is that we have a stadium, it is unnamed. And I've mentioned veterans issues before, and I like the idea of all veterans stadium.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I know.
I believe we're straying from the subject at hand, and I would ask Mr. Croft to restrain
No
himself.
editorial, all right, well, thanks for the bombast, I'll keep
One
that
moment, Mr. Michaud.
under,
I will allow him,
advisement.
only because I think I crossed the line in some of the remarks I'm making. This is a very important thing. Mr. Croft, you can continue your statement, please.
Yes, thank you.
I apologize.
And with that in mind, current events in mind, we are about a mission of noting extraordinary, let's say, achievement and commitment to this town. And John provided that. Thus, we can vote to have that football facility named after John. But I just would prefer that someday we create a facility that we can fill with names. Him, perhaps, being as old as he is, being the first to get his foot in the gate. And there's nothing wrong with that as far as I can see now.
Further,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Croft.
Hmm.
Further comments? Seeing none, I'm going to just remind folks that it's a majority vote here. The vote, we need 4 votes to pass a motion. Sir?
I just didn't know if you were accepting any comment from,
I wasn't going to unless you have a question regarding the process.
I guess I do, actually.
If you'd like to come up,
Sure.
please state your name.
Sure. My name is Ted Conover. I actually grew up in Reading. I lived here for the first 35 years of my life.
Where do you live now?
I live in Boston now. In Boston.
Okay.
I was made aware of this issue, like many of you were, via Facebook, and I have been observing it and participating in it for the last several months. And I guess my specific question is that the policy that's in place, maybe it is in need of review or tweaking, as is any policy, but the policy that's in place was used to name 2 other facilities at your meeting back in February, I believe.
Yes.
And when I think many of us here and others who have followed online who have been reading about this issue, when we first read that at your February meeting you didn't name the football field after Mr. Hollingsworth, we were curious why. And I think the conclusion that a lot of us came to is one that you actually referred to earlier this evening, where you said that you perhaps didn't know him, had never met him, and didn't know him as well then as you did now, based on presumably some of what you read online, but also talking to other folks in the town. And as I have followed your comments in particular online, you've sent a couple of posts to the Facebook page, and I have...
Just a clarification.
Right.
I sent some email communications
Right.
that were posted.
My point was that you seemed very interested in making sure that all those who were following the issue were aware of the procedures that would take place. And I thought a comment that you made earlier tonight about, you don't know a lot of us necessarily, and many of us don't know you. We went to Reading High at different generations. But I think that the beauty of what Facebook and the internet allows is it allows us to learn things that maybe we did not know before we had some of this information. I graduated from Reading High in 1977, and I knew Mr. Hollingsworth because I was a reporter in town. I didn't have him as a teacher. I didn't have him as a coach. I have learned so much about him as a person, having read the things that all of these folks have posted, things that I never had any exposure to. So I know you're saying, okay, so get to the point.
I was trying.
Here's my point. My point is that there's a policy in place. You folks have a policy, and you use that policy to name 2 other facilities, if I'm understanding the process correctly.
You are correct.
What I'm hearing tonight, I think from just about everybody on this board, is that you all feel like we have the right person. And we would all feel good about naming the football field after Mr. Hollingsworth. And if that doesn't happen tonight, I think we're all going to leave this room and people are going to say, why didn't they do it? Or we're going to say, I don't know. I can't figure that out. They have this policy that maybe it needs some tweaking, but it was used for 2 other individuals, and we have a 3rd individual who seemingly is extremely worthy, and I just don't know, to the point of what some of you said, what's going to happen between now and the fall that would change whether Mr. Hollingsworth is worthy of having the football field named after him. There aren't any other nominations that we're aware of. There hasn't been an ounce of negative feeling that he might not be worthy of this. So I guess I don't understand, and maybe you could help me understand better, what will happen between now and the fall that might make you folks make a different decision than one that it appears that you're headed for tonight. So I guess I'm just looking to understand a little bit better what it is that's precluding a vote tonight, because it sounds like you have 2 issues. One is, will we reconsider? And if we do reconsider, will we vote for Mr. Hollingsworth? And the first one isn't allowing the second one to happen, even though if the first one did happen, it seems like it's pretty clear what that second vote would be. So for those who feel like it ought to wait, I guess I'm just curious what's going to happen over the next 6 months that might make it worthy of a reconsideration at that time, but not now.
Certainly. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
It has always been the committee's desire to get this done correctly, which is, I think, the impetus for the conversations in February, which were around, do we have the right person? Are we doing the right thing? I'm sure that you guys have all been watching our budget deliberations over the past 3 months. We have terrible financial problems right now with our school budget. We wanted to explore. Can we sell the name? Can we do something? Are we making the right decision here? Those are some of the questions that we had. Those might be some of the questions that we would answer over the next couple of months. As I stated, my mind is made up, but there are certainly good reasons for making sure that we get this right. I don't know if I helped answer. If anybody else wanted to add to that, they certainly could. Mr. Roberts.
I don't think there's, I mean, as I tried to say earlier, I mean, I've been very moved by everything I've received about Mr. Hollingsworth, and I'm not looking, I mean, I've been convinced that he's worthy. My feeling was, if we voted once, we had a policy that it says it will bring it up again in the fall. If we don't follow that policy, we could end up every month voting on something because somebody didn't like the vote that came out the first time. So I'm just trying to stick by the policy. If the committee decides to vote tonight to have another vote, I would vote in favor of Mr. Hollingsworth. My feeling was that I wanted to wait and follow our policy to when we did it in February and do it again in the fall.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to,
Can we read, I'm sorry,
yeah.
can we read the motion again?
move to override the school committee policy on naming of facilities to reconsider the vote on the naming of the football field, which was seconded by Mr. Michaud. Mr. Michaud, are you ready for the vote, or are you kind of looking something up? I think he's ready. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? The motion carries 6-0. At this point,
Well,
I'll
they both
entertain a
are gonna
motion
reconsider the
to
vote.
name the football field. Oh, Mr. Michaud.
Of course. I would like to move to name the Reading Memorial High School football field the John Hollingsworth Field, accepting the nomination that was originally brought forth to us this past fall and the recommendation that was brought to us by our subcommittee.
Second.
How you doing, Miss Engelson? That's excellent. Discussion. No, really?
No,
Okay.
no, I just want to throw out one other thing. This has nothing to do with the policy.
Oh, let's talk about it. Whatever.
We talk about the finances in our community, and we've heard from so many of you, and I would encourage you, we have a Reading Education Foundation in our town, and it wasn't in existence when you were members of the school community, and I would encourage any of you to make donations on, it's a nonprofit, make donations on his behalf and in his honor. Just want to throw that out to you. It has nothing to do with policy or the naming of the field. Just want you to know about that opportunity.
Mr. Michaud.
Just as a point of clarification for those who are concerned about our policy and whether or not we're following our policy reads, nominations of naming of buildings, field structures, rooms, or other such edifices will appear once annually on the school committee's agenda, usually during the first quarter of the school year. The policy does not talk about whether or not we will vote on it, vote on things more than once. It just says nominations will appear on the agenda once. So we're not renominating, we're voting to accept the original nomination. That's why my motion was carefully worded. Thank you, Mrs. Engelson.
Anyone else besides Ms. Janowski or Mr. Michaud? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion read by Mr. Michaud? Opposed? The motion. We have a lot more to go through on this agenda.
They're all welcome to stay.
Take a 2-minute recess.